I'm with you. This is the 415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network 95.7 The Game, coming at you twice a week here in the off season, three times, as Mark mentioned. Once the season gets started, it's coming soon. Cannot wait for it. But that's Marc Grandi. I'm Evan Giddings. Please download the Odyssey app, rate us, subscribe to us, and download the podcast there. One thing that I don't know, just kind of got my mind working, Mark, was this idea of, an all-in season, a must-win type of campaign that it feels like a lot of people want the 49ers to get into, but we haven't necessarily discussed outside of the quarterback position, the age or the experience around a lot of these players. And so it just I don't know. It was trying to come up with an idea or question for the pod today, and I started looking at the roster. And compared to last year, I started noticing there's some guys creeping up there in age, and there's guys with contract years coming up, but of course because of their experience, the amount of years they've played in the NFL. So when we pose the question, is age at all a concern for the 2023 49ers? Would you lean more yes or no?
I would say yes. And for me, it's because age is very, very related to your ability to stay healthy. And for the 49ers, that has been their Achilles heel under Kyle Shanahan. Now, not all of their injuries have been related to age necessarily. I mean, you think of Nick Bosa, his second year in the league or third year in the league, whatever that was. That was his second year in the league when he tore his ACL early in the season, missed that entire season. He's come back and he's been healthy since then. But that's an example of age not really being a factor in terms of a major injury. But generally speaking, I think everyone will agree the older you get, the more susceptible you are to injury, the slower you bounce back from injury, and perhaps more likely you are to get re injured once you come back from injury. So the 49ers getting up there in age 100% is a concern, especially when you consider the fact that the 49ers have been thwarted by injuries just about every single year under Kyle Shanahan. Think back to the 2019 season when the 49ers went to the Super Bowl. They were the sixth most injured team that year. They missed the sixth most games missed due to injury. The following year, 2020, that was the Nick Bosa torn ACL year, the most injured team in the NFL. 2021, the year where they struggled for a lot of the regular season, snuck into the playoffs, made the NFC Championship game, the third most injured team in the NFL. This most recent year, of course, with all the injuries at quarterback, the ninth most injured team in the NFL. And again, I'll repeat, not all of those injuries are simply due to old age, but the older that the core of this roster gets, I know there's been a lot of talk about George Kittle, of course, getting up there, 30 years old, Trent Williams nearing retirement at some point as well. Yeah, I'm concerned. I think this is the one when you look at what could derail this season, I think age/injury is the number one killer for this 49ers team. Obviously, there could be wild things that happen that maybe show themselves to be a reason why the 49ers can't get it done this year. But if you were to pick one out of a hat, what's the reason the 49ers underachieve, don't achieve all their goals this year? It's injuries. So 100% I'm concerned about age. I think that's the one weakness the 49ers have on this roster. It's that they are relying on a number of positions on veterans who have an injury history.
So at first, when I thought about this, I didn't honestly consider the injury too much. I think that's a good point, though. And after doing a little bit of research, I've maybe not done a 180 on it not being a concern, but we'll call it like a 140 on it being a concern because I started to look at some of the teams that have been successful and the average age. I mean, generally, I think you kind of correlate age with experience, and you want that on your team. But the NFL is so much different than the MLB, NBA, just because bodies break down sooner. So you're absolutely right there. Injury is a concern. But when I try to tackle the question if it's a concern for the 49ers, I look at last season. They were the 11th oldest team in the NFL. They might not sound all that high, 20 average age of 26 years, 9 months, but the next 10 teams, four of which made the playoffs, only one of them won a playoff game. Okay, so that's one data point. The 49ers, when they made the Super Bowl in 2019, were an average age of 25 years and 5 months. They were in the bottom 10, roughly, of teams. So they were very young considering the average of the league. And looking at the last 10 Super Bowl winners in the NFL, or I should say the oldest Super Bowl winners in the NFL, apologies. You're looking at the oldest team to win, 2019 Patriots. Second oldest team, 2021 Buccaneers. Third oldest team, 2009 Steelers. After that, 2010 Saints, 2013 Ravens, 2020 Chiefs, 2012 Giants, 2016 Broncos, 2008 Giants. What is the common theme of all of those teams that were old and won the Super Bowl? They had a very good quarterback, a Pantheon level quarterback for much of those teams. That is something that the 49ers currently do not have. And that's one thing that gives me pause is when I look at both how the 49ers were last season, how the rest of the teams around their age group did, along with the oldest teams to have won a Super Bowl, it doesn't quite seem to match up. So for me, it's a concern in the sense that I just don't think there's much of a precedent for it for the 49ers to be, Super Bowl caliber at this point. And then as well, to your point about the injuries, I think there's absolutely something there. So is there a concern? Yes, because the data, at least from the research that I've done, would point to there being a reason to being concerned.
Yeah, no, 100%. But then you kind of dig into the roster a little bit. I mean, you look at the 49ers starters. How many of them are 30 or more right now? And I know George Kittle is approaching that, but he's not quite there. Trent Williams, over 30. That's on offense. Jake Brendel, over 30. Kyle Juszczyk, over 30. That's it for the starters on offense. I mean, that's not that much. The thing is, it's your most important offensive lineman. You can make the case one of your most important players, period. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, over 30, Javon Hargrave and Tayshaun Gibson. Hargrave, obviously, very important. Gibson, obviously, you'd love for him to stay healthy and not have to call into question his age. But the 49ers, their first draft pick, Jair Brown out of Penn State, looks like he could soon potentially take over one of the starting safety spots. So it's really not necessarily a gigantic numbers issue for the 49ers in terms of just how many guys they have that are over a certain age. 30 is the benchmark I'm using. But it's that they are in really key positions. And then you factor in, again, what has happened in the past for the 49ers. It just seems like it's something that might rear its ugly head again. I'm hoping it doesn't, of course. I mean, consider what the 49ers have accomplished with all of these injuries. And I know this is more about age than injuries, but for me, these two are inexplicably bound in my mind. And just imagine what this 49ers team could accomplish and could do if they get a mostly healthy season. And last year, oddly enough, I mean, you take out the quarterback issues, and that was the best season they've had health-wise in the Shanahan era. I mean, they lost how many quarterbacks? Two throughout the regular season, but then two more in the postseason. It was wild the way that they dropped like flies, but the rest of the team, for the most part, was relatively healthy. Eric Armstead missed a big chunk of the season. That was the big one. Trent Williams missed a game or two here or there. He was hurt at the end of that Broncos game that I referenced earlier. George Kittle missed week 1 and week 2, I think, and then returned week 3. But really, you just had minor things the rest of the way, aside from the quarterback room. And that's an example. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously a veteran, but I wouldn't blame his injury on age necessarily. It was just an unfortunate play and the way it happened. But the 49ers, if they are able to get out of a season, Evan, where you don't look back and say, man, they're just too old at key positions. If that isn't an excuse, if that isn't a reason for this team falling short this one season, just imagine what they could accomplish. We haven't yet really seen that for the 49ers in the Shanahan era. We've spent so much time talking about it. How, who do you blame? Do you blame Shanahan? Do you blame the staff the medical team, how do you explain this injury history? We don't really know how to explain it. But just imagine if they're able to get one season, a top 10 health season across the league. It would be incredible to see because we haven't yet seen that from a team that, despite all of that, has still been largely successful.
Well, I think I'd push back a little bit on not a top 10 health season. Like, yes, at maybe the quarterback position, that is absolutely true. They have befallen injuries like no other. But last year, I just took a quick peek. Like they had 9 members of their defense that played all 17 games. Like not all of them started, but the amount of health that they had outside of the quarterback position, I think you're right in your original statement. Like it was pretty fortunate. And the amount of season-ending injuries were pretty few. I mean, the biggest one that comes to my mind that happened early in the year that you had to overcome was Emmanuel Mosley.
Mhm.
And then the other one, which was not season ending, but was season impacting, was probably Elijah Mitchell because you're expecting him to be, if not your starting quarterback, then, or sorry, your starting running back, one of them. And so that's why then you go out and address that by getting McCaffrey. Uh, I do wonder how much health does kind of stick around this year just because it's the nature of the NFL. So I didn't think that health was that big of an issue for the 49ers outside of, I guess you could argue, the most important position. But then again, they went through 3 guys and still won 13 games. So, Kyle Shanahan proved that maybe he could overcome some of those quarterback laden injuries. I don't know. It's interesting, Mark, and it's one thing that I kind of expect to maybe turn in the opposite direction a little bit, but hopefully it's not at the quarterback spot.
Yeah, no, and I know we're going to move on here in just a second. One more thing to add. I think this also might be an opportunity, and I know Nick Wagner of ESPN wrote about this earlier this week, I believe, about George Kittle and his injury history and how often he's used. Of course, not just when he's catching passes, but he's involved in the running game because he's such a great blocker. I think there's an opportunity, or you would hope at least, there's an opportunity for Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers to perhaps pull back a little bit from, putting their guys full tilt, like how many snaps these guys are getting every game. And the way you hope that that's possible is that you stay relatively healthy to start. You don't feel like you're ever chasing anything. You stay on pace. You get the season off to a good start. Your first place in the NFC West, wire to wire. You don't feel like you need to turn it on, and you can kind of pace yourself a little bit. I know specifically we've talked about that with Christian McCaffrey. Perhaps you don't need the volume from McCaffrey this season as you saw the second half of last year because the 49ers were chasing the NFC West. Then they were chasing the 3 seed. Then they were chasing the 2 seed and still potentially chasing the 1 seed. If the 49ers are in a position where they can pull back on snaps from some of their veteran stars, this is a year, I think, where they absolutely have to take it. That's a big if because things always go wrong in a football season. But if they have that opportunity, they must do it this year.